Of course, yeah. You only talk about happy things.
You are, even to your grandson and daughter. Sorry, Grace.
No, you're fine.
So she's connected to Steve, who I believe is our financial secretary. She's wonderful. So he plays trombone and has been in Nebraska. So he played last week when we played the piece that you got. Yeah. But they met in the marching band at Butler, I believe, to get their married. And her, Carrie, and they have 2 children, and their son plays trombone. I know. So they met in the she's wonderful. And their son plays trombone like their dad, and their daughter plays flute like the mom. So they've done like duets and stuff at church too. Yes, and so what's funny is their wedding anniversary is the same as my parents. Who also met the marching band. They found out when they met each other. They were like, oh, well, you know, our wedding anniversary. And they're like, oh, when is it? They're like, oh, June 29th. Yeah. They're like, oh my gosh, us too. And they're like, oh, we met in the Miami University marching band. We met in the Baltimore marching band. Yes, I know. So.
Well, no, I don't know.
Yes, she was.
But I thought about that.
Because I maybe said I got this. I didn't get that. I don't think I've ever seen it. So,
There's 2.
thank you.
Will he do it?
Yeah.
Yep, sure did.
Yeah. So hard.
There's crayons we give out so people can color in this contest.
Oh yeah. The band is
I believe everybody's covered.
What did I do? Oh,
A little bit. With this for this part.
This is for
well, we sure cleaned this place out, telling them.
Oh yeah.
I want to go to the rock climbing. I'm not going to be home so yeah, but I can't do that.
You would do it to me?
Yes, but my mom will. That's not true. You're in a you can have it if you and Amos.
That's just your normal reaction. She looks at me like I'm a
I see.
I just thought it was this place out. Everybody left.
Coming behind you.
Careful, I'm starting to kick it, right? Hey, Jill. Got any other hand? I know she does. I haven't thought about Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like these.
Where's the hospitality?
Yeah.
She just, that's what Isaiah says. One sip. One sip. Oh my God, she's really good at ignoring.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for
processing
doing overtime again, or once a month overtime.
I was impressed.
So we'll go ahead and get started.
Apologize. I did
Don't
not mean
apologize.
Your presence here does help your leadership quite a bit, so thank you for staying. So today's meeting is a continuation of our I'm Eric Smith, Congregation President. I think most of you know that. Being opening and welcoming, I will just restate that. Okay, so today's meeting is a continuation of our fire restoration process, an early step in our remodeling process. We're going to have a congregational update meeting again on December 3rd and January 15th, and likely will continue these updates well into 2024. So the timing of our congregational votes on proposed projects will be determined as ideas and expertise are gathered, which we are continuing to work on. In terms of timing, we also want to remind everyone that our building has not physically changed since the fire. It hasn't been cleaned out. It remains unchanged at this point in time. The many disaster recovery professionals we have spoken with throughout this process so far have reassured us that this timing and pacing in our recovery process and remodeling process is in fact normal. We also have some anecdotal evidence that tells us we're on track. We're doing okay in terms of timing. So just wanted to let you know that we had been checking in on that as well as a governance council. In addition to the fire recovery updates and the remodel updates, we are also taking today to return to a conversation we started way back in the spring, probably seems like a long time ago now, with the Wabash Democracy and Public Discourse Fellows. And in a way, we're both looking back and looking forward in today's meeting. And with that perspective and framework in mind, I will invite Dakota to pray.
So before I pray, Lori and I don't usually do anything that's not intentional. And so we intentionally left up our saints because it's important that those who have come before us are remembered and are addressed as we continue to look to the future. So that's something intentional we decided to do. I'd like to invite you to take a deep breath and let us pray. God, you encounter us on the road, and you encounter us in the temple. You encounter us at parties and at funerals. In the loudest, most chaotic moments and in the quietest, darkest hours, you are there. Join us in this meeting now, O God. The operations of your church can appear less glamorous than prayer and worship. But it is in the margins of financial spreadsheets and timelines and building plans that we see you, scribbled as a question mark and highlighted. Signs of you can be found among the many emails, the phone calls, and the cups of tea and coffee shared with another. Today we have gathered as a group of your people, not to decide, not to argue, and not to fix, but to listen, to ask questions, and to assist one another in discerning your will and your way, not our own. Where we see delays, help us to see opportunities. Where we see scarcity, help us to know your abundance. Where we see roadblocks, help us meet them as challenges you help us to overcome. We need your voice, O God, your wisdom and your guiding hand. May our words be your words. May our plans be a part of your plan. And may we seek to love you and love our neighbors more than anything. Amen. Lori, you want to come up?
Who's this one? Yeah. So meet James. If you were not here back in the spring, Wabash Democracy and Public Discourse led a deliberation for us in which we were discussing the broad category of accessibility in our building and what that meant and how we might engage that topic. And so there were a number of fellows who led us in that experience, and the plan was to then report out about it late in the summer, and then we had a fire. So James and I talked, and they offered to have him come back and do the ending of that experience a little bit differently because our whole world changed. And so what you are going to hear now is a summary and some findings and really good launching point for our conversations that are to come. So that's your framework. If you were not at the event, that's okay. You are going to get a summary that allows you to get caught up and to know exactly what that prepped us for as a congregation pre-fire. So here we go.
Can everybody hear me?
Oh, Liz has a question. There's more coffee for those of you who didn't get it. And if you don't have handouts, raise your hand and we'll get them to you. Okay, we will bring handouts, get your coffee, the adults. Got it. Oh, that's okay, we'll share. We've got one back there. You're good.
Hello, everyone. As Laura said, my name is Dr. James Prozek, and I am with Wabash College in Crawfordsville. So I want to start by thanking Lori, by thanking Dakota, by thanking Eric for bringing me here today, and for thanking you all taking time out of your schedule to listen to the outcome of our report. So a little bit about me and a little bit about our organization again, just to kind of frame the work that we do. I do work at Wabash College in two capacities. First, as a visiting assistant professor of rhetoric, so I'm in the rhetoric department at the college, and then I'm also a program associate for our Democracy and Public Discourse Initiative, which we use as an acronym, WDPD. So that work that brought us to St. Peter's United Church of Christ was to have a conversation, you can see it on your handout, about accessibility. How do we foster accessibility, not only in terms of the physical space, but also in terms of our languages and practices. So what we do in our program is we train college students in a particular mode of communication called deliberation. So if you were part of that conversation in April, can you just raise your hand for me? Fantastic. I recognized some familiar faces, but I did not realize that there were so many folks here. Thank you all so much for your time and effort that had already been put into there. And you all know a little bit then about what we do. We bring our fellows to the community. We gather in small groups to have the conversation where the Democracy Fellows are asking questions. And then once those questions are posed, everybody in the small group takes some time to share their values, experiences, opinions, and we're writing it down. In this case, we were not so much writing as having that recorder there, but recording things, anonymously taking notes and developing them into a report. And so once we deliver that report, usually what happens is we present it to our community partner. Now the way this is different this time around is I remember emailing Lori to tell her that the report is done, we're ready to go, let's think about next steps because we had a project that we were excited to do in the fall. And then Lori let me know there was a fire, that things were on hold. I can remember where I was. I was in the parking lot of a Meijer grocery store that's right by my apartment. I can't remember how long I sat in that Meijer, but to tell you that I think the best word for it would be crestfallen. I care about the work that we do, and I see the impact it makes on the communities. And so to know that we just had this wonderful conversation and that a fire, and in a sense, my thought was taken away, all the work we had done. Crestfallen was all I could feel. But after some time talking with Lori, I realized this is actually a really important opportunity for us to continue talking, and as Dakota said, not to argue, but to listen and ask questions. And so part of this debrief is to do just that, to say, now that we have the report, where do we go from here? So what I want to do is take some time to present different items about the project that were discussed. On the back sheet, you'll see some themes. I'm going to go over each of these in a little bit of detail, and please, at any point, if any of these items draws you to a question, raise that hand, interrupt me, and say, whatever it is that is on your mind is on your heart. So I'm going to start by talking about our first table, the areas of focus for future renovations. So the way that this project was designed, whenever we were first initializing all the way back in January of last year, what we wanted to do, or I suppose January of this year, it's been a long year, January 23. We had a series of elements of the church that we thought, what do we want to discuss in terms of physical restoration, and then some accessibility practices. And so what we're interested in figuring out is across the small groups, which areas might be discussed the most often. So in terms of priority, this is not what people express should be done first or should be done last, but rather this table is to emphasize items that were discussed most often. So when we start first with signage and the importance of posting different signs throughout the building or making current signs more readable, it was funny to me that this was actually something that did not come up in our preparations. We didn't write any questions that focused on signage, and yet what we found is this was a common concern across all of our small groups. So you can see here in terms of the suggested changes, there were a couple of ideas. Number one that we found was that folks found the signage, the welcome signage out front, a little bit difficult to see and to invite when you're coming and driving from the street. And so particularly where accessible parking might be located. So one suggested change was to make outside signage a little bit more visible, making sure that in the welcome, those who were driving in their cars could see more easily. But then also throughout the building, creating signage that was a little bit higher so that people could see and in a little bit larger font was also suggested just to make the interior space more navigable. So again, this is one of those situations where we say, what all of the specifics are left for more individual kinds of ideas and discussions, but it was an important platform for jumping off to say, okay, we know we want to see more visibility in terms of where things are labeled and posted. Number two, the retractable wall. You see here that I put it in quotes because when we first came, the wall was in fact stationary. And so this also represents the item that we might say has a big impact on how the fire has impacted where we move going forward. Because while some groups thought that we should establish a more permanent wall, perhaps with a glass wall so that there could be better visibility but still a barrier, other groups encouraged maybe a half wall and a half open area. And some liked the idea of still making the wall retractable in some way. So now that we have the opportunity in front of us to really consider we know this wall now will change, what sorts of changes we would like to see. We have a couple different options that are on the table there. At this point, I see no interruption, no hands up, but I want to pause for any initial questions from these two items. So do we have any questions or thoughts at this point? Okay, seeing none. Next, most common item was a discussion about church entrances. And here we find for our report the first kind of major discussion where folks balanced weighed the options, the careful weighing of long-term versus short-term implementations, renovations, and fixes. Because one of the big challenges that folks noted was how much time, money, effort might be involved in creating wheelchair accessible front entrances in terms of ramps. We had several folks who brought their engineering background to the table and said in order to construct these, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of capital perhaps. But at the same time, we talked about entrances, an area that we did not expect the conversation to turn but very glad that it turned this way, was addressing drainage and flooding issues to the side entrances, and then making sure that the entrances were discussed in a way about what do we do in terms of safety and security for the building when people need to get in and out during non-worship hours. What would be going on there? So that was another key point of the conversation, not just in terms of how do we redesign the space, but how do we think about practices related to the space. Coming in number 4, church pews. One of the first things, and now I've conducted about a dozen deliberations in my 3 years here with Democracy and Public Discourse. I've never had a small group decide to take a field trip mid-discussion. So that was something new and fun to see. Each small group said, why don't we go and we look at the space and make some ideas based on our, traversing that space. And so as we went into the sanctuary and looked at the pews, there were multiple concerns of accessibility that were brought up about the way the pews. And so it's not just a situation of wheelchair accessibility. Folks talked about how the space would fit different kinds of bodies, right, and different kinds of challenges. And so with that, what you see are a couple of different ideas about what should happen with the pews. So first of all, replacing pews completely with chairs. And one of the big, advantages that folks spoke about was greater flexibility in how the chairs might be moved. In deliberation, we always talk about benefits and drawbacks. And so one of the drawbacks that was mentioned with a complete replacement is you might have less seating chairs. And so how would that affect the growth of the congregation moving forward? Some folks offered a hybrid model. So while we keep some pews there, we also add chairs in different places. But again, there were questions about, well, what would that work in terms of the structural layout? How might that change? Inviting future conversation, which is one of the ideas of having this first listening conversation. Where should we go toward the future? Lastly, we have, again, this is most discussed. So there are other items, of course, that were brought up. And so if you don't see them here, that's okay. These are the items that we counted across groups. These were most often featured, which of course is the chancel area and the choir lot. Again, we see this idea of long versus short-term changes. So what ideas, one of the things that was noted on these field trips about the choir loft is the steepness of the loft for some of these steps. And so while railings were proposed for both the chancel area and the choir loft, there was also a question of, do we need to lower both spaces and what kind of engineering requirements will be needed to lower those spaces? Just a few ideas that were proposed. Once again, it's a pause point for me. Are there any questions about any of the items? Please.
The issue of higher issue of chairs and pews or just chairs. The question was issue about chairs and pews or just chairs. Given that all our body parts are not created equal, the chairs, I would think, would pose a barrier to a successful integration of those chairs, or are those chairs of more of a stadium seating type variety or a lounge seating type variety? Or can you tell me?
A great question. This is one of the elements that in the report was left to be discerned, right? So there were discussions about different types of chairs, how much space should be placed in between the chairs and the pews, but in terms of the actual design of which type of chair should we identify as most important, we didn't dig deep into that yet. So this would be a point for future consideration. I'm glad that you bring up. I can say that one piece of the pew conversation that was suggested is if we keep pews, maybe doing a redesign so that there's more space in between the rows. But in terms of chairs, what were suggested were chairs that might interlock with one another or be removable rather than in a fixed place. But in terms of the actual design of the chairs beyond that, nothing specifically in the report or in our findings about how those should look. Other questions? Please.
sure Bill and Grant's probably aware of this, but in discussing the pews and the chairs, flexibility, we also have to consider the lighting in the ceiling that might have to be replaced, bringing equipment in there to change it out. So that's something to think about. I know a lot of us are aware of that, but some people don't know what it takes to get that equipment in there and move those pews out of the way, just to do those sort of things. So just something to consider.
Definitely an important point that was brought up as an advantage of the flexibility of chairs was giving more opportunities to more easily install certain lighting things. Of course, again, in everything that we look at in the report, we talk about the benefits and then the drawbacks, right? And which drawbacks can we live with, or which benefits do we want to move forward on? I think I saw another hand over here.
Yeah, I was interested in the entrances because our small Thursday morning group has been attending a church that has sliding glass doors that are open. So you do not have to pull them open. They don't go in or out, they're sliding. Much easier to go in and out.
Fantastic, thank you. This would be an idea that I think is where we want to direct the future conversation, which is to say, we know that multiple groups brought up accessibility of entrances, although no groups that we could tell from the different conversations brought up the possibility of sliding doors. We did note that safety, security, accessibility beyond the ramps, the doors themselves was brought up. And so this is a good idea for thinking, how do we move that particular piece of the conversation forward? Fantastic. I love these questions. I appreciate the chance to talk more in depth about the pieces that interest you all. Last call for questions on this section. Okay, if you move to the second page, if you flip your handout over, you'll see that we also identified a couple of major themes that occurred among the different groups. So when we do the theming process, we do a close textual analysis of what has been mentioned. We do a sentiment analysis to determine positive versus critical reception of certain things. And so outside of the projects themselves, the first major theme that we saw in terms of how participants chose to discuss accessibility was an open question and a deep discussion about what exactly constitutes accessibility. Many conversations we found started out with questions, ideas, concerns about physical mobility. How do those with different accessibility needs and challenges related to their physical navigation of the space, how are we making sure to address those and be proactive about them? And so I think if you see some of the proposed changes, a lot of that maps on to questions and ideas about physical mobility and the inclusive practices thereof. However, what we also found were discussions about what it means to create an opening, welcome, and inclusive places, not just in terms of physical, but some of the intangible things. So historically marginalized groups, different social identities. How does accessibility relate to our practices there? And so several groups brought up the importance of being an open and affirming church in that way. There wasn't a lot of specific discussion about what practices could be maintained, changed, or adopted in that way, except for multiple groups saying that the importance of relating accessibility and connecting it to historically marginalized groups and different social identities, making sure that they felt welcome and safe within the space. Second key theme related to that was the importance of understanding and kind of doing a little bit of educational work and then proactive communicating of the differences between visible and invisible accessibility challenges, right? And so part of this was related to making entrance spaces more visible and letting people know if they had any kind of accessibility challenge that support was there. It also manifested in the importance of conversations. So several groups talked about how to discuss different ways of accessible practices and what to do about when a mobility challenge or a hearing impairment or a visual impairment may not be readily understood what to provide. One particular intervention there that I thought was really interesting was around the idea of pamphlets and providing literature that would be more accessible for, if a person has this particular accessibility issue, can we provide literature about it to them? Can we provide more systems to access, like Braille, for example, being one of them. Lastly, and kind of, I think, a good final theme to think about in the future is the difference between short-term and long-term renovation projects. So when we ask folks in their small groups to prioritize, where would you like to start in thinking about particularly the renovations, folks really focused on prioritizing where time, money, and efforts should be made. And in that way, folks tended to talk about what can we complete in the short term versus which renovations are going to be more of a long term. And so we saw across groups different priorities being made for different lengths of time. Some groups preferred to start on short-term projects immediately, while others focused on we should look at one long-term renovation to start. And so an open question is whether or not the fire changes the opinions on which project should be completed first. Now, I've sent a full report to Dakota and Lori and everyone to help sort out the priority, but I think there's an open question here to be discussed about, do the short term and long term, do these priorities still make sense, or do we need to reprioritize in light of the fire and where we should go from here? So at this point, that's all I have for you all. And if anybody needs another coffee break, I think there's going to be fresh coffee, but I will also stay for a second to answer any questions or stay for the full time of our meeting together. So if you'd like to find me separately and just ask a question one-on-one, happy to stick around to answer any and all questions. And again, I'd just like to reiterate my thanks for your time, for your attention. This was a wonderful project. I know we're looking forward to working with you all again in the spring. However, that might look for a different kind of conversation. And so I just really am excited about the future and working with this wonderful group and community. So thank you all so much.
So James is like the perfect transition to know that we've already been talking about these things pre-fire, and then where he ended was, does the fire change some of these conversations? And the answer is probably. And John Kraler, Building and Grounds team leader, also our modeling team leader, is going to kick off this portion of the agenda. And I know you've all been looking at the agenda because you haven't. It's long, but we have a plan. Okay, so it was important to invest that time in our history. We are now moving forward. I need one point of order. Follow along. I promise there's a reason. Look at your current handout. Turn to page 4. There was a printing issue at the local Office Depot. Does anybody have a copy in which it almost looks like there's a ghost drawing on the left? Okay, I will bring you, well, there shouldn't be anything in it, but can you at least see the lines of an empty building? You can see the lines. There are some where you can't even see the lines. If you can't see the lines, tell me. Okay, great. I'll bring a better one to you, Sarah. Cool, John, you're up.
Thank you, Lori. Good morning, everybody, and appreciate your participation and your persistence and your patience. We've got kind of a new definition of the passage of time, I think, now. I was talking to Craig about this just yesterday. We were talking about the roof. Talking about Craig with a C, not Greg with a G. The other architect who's on our design team. I know it's hard to keep them straight. We've asked them to come up with nicknames for themselves to make it a little easier for us. We've asked their significant others about their pet nicknames, and that's not really going to be suitable for this purpose. So anyway, if any of you have any new ideas, but anyway, Craig and I were talking about it, and it's like we feel like we're working fast. We meet every week. We have emails every day. We have phone calls all the time, and yet at the same time, we feel a little bit like we're on a glacier and we're just going very slowly. But we are making progress, and this is a really important part of that progress, to get your input. Somebody mentioned listening earlier. I think it's really an iterative process of listening to the whole congregation, really being a congregationally led congregation, and then figuring some things out and reading that back to you, and then we want to listen to your input. So critical thing as you hear what we have to talk about today is be ready to vote in a very detailed way. We're going to be asking you to complete a survey online with comments, with scores. If you hate doing things online, we'll get it from you on paper. But on all of the ideas that you're going to hear about and our financing plan, we really now need your input so that we can listen, so that we can then take it to the next level. So what you're going to hear today, not surprisingly, first of all, comes from the Wabash conversations that we already had. And you're going to hear a lot of themes from what you just heard in the last 20 minutes. But also your posted notes that were provided in the cafeteria over the last couple of weeks, conversations with you one-on-one, with leadership, etc. So this is our kind of check-in with you. Are we on target, or do we need a course correction, right? That's what this is all about. Now, I want to tell you about the 3 goals that we have had as we have tried to develop these proposals. Accessibility, sustainability, flexibility. So accessibility, creating a space that's accessible and welcoming to everybody, carrying forward the priorities that you just heard about. Sustainability in a couple of ways. One, green improvements, but also investing in high quality products that will really kind of stand the test of time as we go forward the next couple of decades for our building. And then flexibility, preparing for the unknown. For example, ensuring spaces can be used in a number of different ways for different ministries over time, and that might mean over the course of a month, it might mean over the course of a decade, can be flexibly used for different purposes. So in addition to those 3 goals that we were trying to follow, accessibility, sustainability, and flexibility, I'll tell you about a couple of other key points to maybe keep in mind as you hear these presentations. We want you to think about a new design aesthetic. In other words, can we take this opportunity to create a cohesive and updated, but yet hopefully timeless aesthetic throughout the whole building that ties the whole building together? I would ask you to remember that no programming decisions have been made, and that comes back to the whole flexibility idea. In other words, we have not made decisions, you have not made decisions as a congregation about our future programs or ministries, including the preschool, right? So we hope to bring in a consultant to help the congregation and to assist us in making those kinds of decisions in the future. However, what we've said to do in order to get this project done in a reasonable amount of time is to try to make building decisions, construction decisions, without knowing exactly what kinds of ministries will be using the building in the future. So again, attempting to design spaces in a very flexible way. Number 4, think about your own financial generosity. These are the remodeling projects or the improvement projects that are not paid for by insurance. So these are the ones that will be the financial responsibility, one way or the other, of the congregation. And I'll talk about that a little bit before we're done here today. And then finally, think of this as our first discussion of some serious conceptual designs. It's a start, both in terms of what you're going to hear about and our very rough cost estimate. It is a start. We don't have anything that you would call a bid on any of these projects. And in fact, we can't because we want to know more from you about exactly what we ought to do. Then it'll be worthwhile to get those bids. Having said that, we know that it doesn't make sense to go shopping for cars and go to the wrong dealership, right? You want to have some idea of how much money you're willing to spend or how much it's going to cost. So I think somewhere in your handouts today, we have said that we think if we did all of these projects that we're recommending could be considered and did all of them in a pretty darn nice way, we wouldn't spend more than $450,000. So that's a decent amount of money. So think of that as probably the upper end of an estimate for doing everything that you're going to hear about today. I think, Lori, that I'm not taking questions. We're just moving right along with Dakota and Lori Radford. Thank you.
Okay, so my things to talk about are related to aesthetics and flexibility. The first one is the movable wall. Insurance will cover the replacement of that. We have that information. So we are recommending that we do replace that. So not create a permanent wall there or really kind of change the function of what that used to be so that we can have lots of flexibility going forward. The next thing is we think it would be good to add doors on the northeast end of Fellowship Hall. So that is the opening nearest to like where the choir enters the sanctuary. Just to close off that space and entirely, so that this Fellowship Hall can be entirely closed off, because right now it can't, and to help manage sound. So those are some recommendations we have for the Fellowship Hall. Next is the sanctuary. James spoke about seating, and that is a big consideration. John had mentioned at a previous meeting that we were seriously looking into what are called pew chairs, and that is our recommendation going forward. Just to describe a little bit to you about those, they can be moved or removed to improve accessibility for all, allowing people to choose where they sit instead of kind of being directed based on their physical condition. They can be arranged flexibly into a straight pattern similar to pews, or a radius, kind of an arc pattern for different worship services, plus for special events in the sanctuary. Again, with having the movable wall restored to a movable fashion, they could even extend into Fellowship Hall, so we could have a much larger space for big events. They can be moved to make way for special music opportunities. We often have different musical instruments and things as part of our worship, so that would help with that. And then they can be added for high occupancy holidays. A huge consideration of these is the last thing I'm going to talk about with them, and that is comfort. They provide good lumbar support, are comfortable to sit in. They also gang together, so they are able to be seated right next to each other and then have pins that keep them next to each other, which is important to help accommodate all different body sizes. So it's not that you would have a chair and then potentially someone would be uncomfortable sitting in that. There's room, as in a pew, to kind of spread out a little bit. So one of the considerations, there are many different styles, and we're not here today to talk about particular styles and designs and things like that, but I just thought it would be worth mentioning that there are styles that when you're standing at the back of a sanctuary and they are all lined up, resemble the look of a pew. They have the pockets for the Bibles in the back of them, and so I feel like we can kind of strike a balance between people that really prefer the traditional look of a pew, but yet address all of these flexibility and accessibility things that we would like to bring into our sanctuary. There are some other sanctuary design changes too, and you'll be hearing from Craig Pinkwhite about those in a minute. And then the last thing I'll talk about are administrative spaces. We are proposing that we take down the wall in the original pastor's office to create a more flexible space for larger groups. So that would actually return that room to what was there originally. Right now it's the tech space and then the pastor offices, but we would take down the wall to make it a larger group meeting space. The other thing we would like to do is put up a wall where the curtain is in the current parlor. So again, returning to once what was. And with that, create a vestibule for a new office suite in that area. So you'll be seeing and hearing more about that from Greg in a minute. And then I will turn it over to Dakota.
Thanks, Lori. So the two topics that I'm going to address are the bathrooms and the flooring throughout the building. So I'll first start with the bathrooms. What we're proposing is that we would refresh the gendered bathrooms. Those are the bathrooms near the music room, those two men and women's bathrooms there. Because why would we go about making everything in the building new and leave that to still look like the 90s, 2000s, or whenever that was made? So simply refreshing that with some new fixtures, new plumbing, new toilets, all that sort of thing, just to bring it up to being refreshed. The gender-inclusive bathroom, we would like to propose simply those new bathrooms we just put in. Initially, when those were put in, we were worried that if all 5 stall doors opened out, that would create difficulty in walking in that bathroom. We think that there is actually enough space, and so if you remember, the 2 far ones opened out and were more ambulatory, and the other 3 opened in. But when you opened them in, it was difficult to pivot and turn around and close the door. So we're going to propose just simply flipping those to swing out as well. And then the child-size bathrooms, those would be the ones sort of in the preschool wing next to the director's office, is that we would like to propose remodeling those into one ADA family bathroom, like the one that we put in when we did the new bathrooms. The plumbing in there is just no longer operational. As long as I've been here, at least, we've had several plumbing calls to try to fix those toilets. They are not easily fixable, they're not easily replaceable, and they were only being used for emergencies, even by our preschool. The preschool was actually using the new bathrooms and the gendered bathrooms and only using those in a pinch because the plumbing was just not very good. So those are the bathrooms sort of proposals we're making. Now the flooring is a bit trickier, and I'll try to do my best to explain it. Only the tile flooring, that orange terracotta tile in the entry narthex, is going to be safe and cleaned. So if you can get that in your mind, that's going to be washed and cleaned. Think of everything else in the building as getting some form of replacement, hopefully. Okay? Insurance is prepared to cover about 90% of that. There are a couple rooms that they think can also be cleaned, like the music room that has some white tile, and there are some classrooms that have half and half. They're not really prepared to replace that hardwood part. We are proposing that we would, simply for uniformity, again, to bring it up to a newer design and to last a little bit longer. Also, the insurance replacement dollars for the carpet that they're going to replace is not going to be very much, let's put it that way. There are varying degrees of quality of carpet in our building, which is just the nature of it. When you build different additions at different times, the flooring gets updated at different times. And so there's all kinds of different quality, from the sanctuary to fellowship hall to the hallways. Some of it's higher quality, some of it's not as good quality, but the insurance uses a formula, a system, that they take a sample of everything and replace only what they value that thing to be put the same back in there. And so think of it in dollars per square foot. If it's only $1 that they're going to give you per square foot for that, it's going to be very hard to find a supplier to give us a good quality carpeting for that price. So we would just simply add to what insurance gives us to get even a middle of the road, industry standard middle of the road carpeting. And we also want some consistency throughout the building. So even though we could go cheaper in a particular area, we want a consistent aesthetic throughout the building and not have it sort of mismatched. So we will invest a little bit more to ensure that that would happen. So I think that covers my section, hopefully. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Craig Penquite, who's going to talk to us about the sanctuary accessibility.
and you will note that there are drawings on pages 2 and 3 for you. Craig has done an amazing job of giving options that do not translate well to small form copiers, but that's what we have. The good news is when you receive your survey, you will receive links to these drawings that you can make as big as you want to on whatever device you're using, and we will be able to share them in multiple ways. So it's a beginning, and we recognize that it's not the ideal way, but here we are.
It also works to my advantage. I can make it as ambiguous as I want if you can't read it. As already mentioned, based on the previous conversations and the Wabash discussions, we've been looking at ways to make the chancel and choir loft more accessible and accommodating. We're looking at many ideas, 6 of which are in this handout. These are concepts or rough drafts to get us thinking. We will continue to evolve the design as we receive feedback from staff, team leaders, and you, the congregation. We don't have the time today, obviously, to review each design in depth, and as mentioned, these are only starting points and idea generators, not final approaches. However, I would like to point out a couple of prevailing thoughts, many of which have already been discussed. We want the ramps to be visible and a part of the space, not hidden or an afterthought. If you remember correctly, in the church there is sacristy that you can't see from the sanctuary, but it's that hallway that the pastors often approach the chancel area from. That would very easily accommodate a ramp if we wanted to go that route. The issue we've had with that is it's the back entrance, it's the hallway that no one sees or you can't be seen going through. So as we look at adding a ramp in that area, we want to look at ideas that might open up that area, punch openings in the wall, something like that, that you could or would enter that ramp area from the sanctuary, making it part of the sanctuary rather than a separate hallway. And also the possibility of having other openings, almost windows without glass, in that wall that, and decorative lighting coming down from the ceiling that makes that space feel more open and more warm and accommodating, so it's not the back hallway. But also with that, we've always been considering 2 ramps as we design the space to have multiple access points to the chancel area due to the varying activities that occur. So if you think of it even on this space, if you only had 1 ramp and it was over there, you'd be asking someone to approach and come all the way over to this podium. And so you can also think of it in this space, we're proposing kind of opposite side ramps, one at the sacristy and one kind of closer to the choir area. Also, we're examining the pew chairs and how those can help provide flexible options, particularly in creating a music area rather than a choir loft. There's multiple possibilities. One idea is to create less tiers and deeper platforms that could accommodate various groups with or possibly without seating. So one week the area could have a traditional choir, and the next week you could have handbells on the platform, or a quartet, or possibly both. They have the flexibility and width to have a choir and a quartet on the platforms. So all of these designs go back to thinking about the flexibility of the space and not knowing what our needs as a congregation will be in the future. I often think about that we didn't know 5 years ago that we were going to have live stream and a projector and monitor or projector screen in our sanctuary 5 years ago. So what are the pieces that we don't know that are going to be part of our worship in 5 or 10 years? Well, we obviously can't know that, but what we can do is create a space that's flexible and accommodating for whatever the possibilities may be.
So if you want to go ahead and flip your handout to the pages 4 and 5, I would like to talk for a moment about the concept of a welcoming entry. As we talked about how do we make what is called entry number 2 or the north entry more welcoming, one of the things that popped into my head was how do we extend our current entry system up to that area so that it all feels like it's connected and welcoming no matter what door you go. So one of the things that we kind of were sketching around the drawings one night as we met as a team, one of the things that was developed out of that conversation was the thought, as Dakota indicated, of removing the non-functioning restrooms that are down in the north end of the building and opening that space up to a new vestibule, a vestibule that instead of taking you down the hallway towards the existing classroom area, actually brings you into the entry and turns you immediately and focuses your travels more towards the entry that everyone else utilizes. So in a large way, this is an extension of our current entryway. And I would point out that it does show a new family restroom that is proximate to that vestibule for people that are coming in that might need to make a pretty quick stop. As Lori Bradford mentioned earlier, you'll see on this drawings on the right, there are some tweaks in the office and conference room area as well. I think, for me, the not only kind of opening this area up, but also taking out the doors that segregate the existing entry from some of the back halls, just all function together, really open this space up so that we don't have the front entry and the back entry. We have multiple entries that all bring us to the same space. So that's kind of the concept that's out there. Obviously, if this is something we as a congregation would like to move forward with, we want to continue to develop and tweak a little more. But this is kind of the big picture thought. So.
Hey, Greg, explain your 2 closer up walkthrough drawings and the parking.
Oh, I knew I mentioned that to you the other day. So on the right-hand side at the top is an image that if you were standing in our current entry looking back towards the new entry, you would see it from there. It would be line of sight visible to you. And then the second image that is on the bottom is of if you were standing where the doors are currently that separate the entry from the classroom areas, what that space would feel like, how it opens up and creates a more welcoming space. What the drawings don't show, but something else that we really had thought a lot about was the idea then that if this entrance is made to feel like it is equally as important, that we would then want to make some changes to the striping in the parking lot. We would move parking so that it was head in against the north end of the building, so that individuals that are needing to move safely from their vehicles to this entrance could do so. We would provide a separate walkway that is not part of the traffic area, so that you could indeed move from your car to this entrance without ever having to cross an area where cars venture. So really segregating the car traffic and the traffic of individuals that need accessibility help. I will add that for new buildings, it's a requirement for code. So this is something that brings our congregation more in line with ADA and those requirements. So I think that's all I got. Unless
Yeah, so we'll add, Jenny Terry's going to come up to talk finances, and there will be a time to field some questions. I will name that for both of these projects, we will be thinking of working with outside experts as well. And one of those areas is to bring in an acoustician. That's your vocabulary word for today, meaning the person who works with the sound in the building. When you're changing all the surfaces and random walls are coming down and all the flooring is changing one way or another, we don't have that expertise to know what will help our sound. We're also losing most of our tech. And so we have opportunities because all the electrical is changing, but that means things might be in different spaces and they might sound different. So we will be working with people who know how to do that to alleviate some of the questions that come up about, but is it going to sound okay? The goal is yes, but not because we're going to dream that up in our heads, but because we're going to have advice from professionals who know how to do that as a part of our redesign.
Good morning. It's the morning. No, good afternoon. Well, we hope that all of you are as excited by all of this work that has been done to this point as we are. And so we're going to pivot a little bit. We hope you're continuing to keep dreaming about how we can make this reality by talking about the finances behind some of these things. So you do have a handout. It's on page 6. I'm not going to read all of this, and there's a lot of detail on this. We wanted to keep things moving today, but I do want to, I'm going to hit a few highlights on this, and then you've got more detail here for folks that might have some additional questions. So, continued messaging here as we've been sharing throughout some of our congregational meetings that the church is in a very healthy place financially through the great work that John and others have done and working with the insurance company, as he mentioned, on a daily basis. The insurance has covered some of our claims already that makes us adjust our forecast for the end of the year favorably. Obviously, it's just a forecast. We're only 4 months into the church's fiscal year, but based on where we stand right now in terms of a budget standpoint, as you might recall, our pre-fire budget was expecting possibly a $15,000 deficit. We're now forecasting that will probably be a balanced budget, maybe be somewhat favorable. So obviously that's great news and due in large part to the good insurance coverage that we had and the good work that's been done to this point. So obviously from a cash flow standpoint, we're in good shape. We have sufficient cash flow to pay our expenses. John's going to talk a little bit more about this, but in terms of just thinking about the church's finances, we kind of have 3 buckets of money. We have our operating funds with a little bit of operating reserve. We have specific funds that are dedicated to specific purposes, one of which includes a building fund, which has about $100,000 in it currently. And then there are some other designated funds that are designated to other purposes, one of which is major maintenance, and we have a missions reserve fund and some other things. And that has about $100,000 in those funds. So as we go forward and think about these things, this is really a viable financial plan that we could do if this is the will of the congregation. So I think I've covered all the things that I needed to cover. So I'm going to invite John to round us out. Yes. Sure. Yes. I was going to whisper to John. I think he was probably going to cover that, but we have had a lot of generosity already in terms of the Facing Forward fundraiser, which has raised, between the Facing Forward fundraiser and other donations to our fire recovery fund, of over $29,000 thus far. So that would all be part of how we would fund these projects. So it's amazing generosity of this congregation, and we have a lot of faith that there's continued generosity to support all these wonderful projects that we've heard about today.
Thanks, Jenny. So I warned you I'd be back to talk about the money, specifically for this. Again, this is our investment that we would have to choose to make, and we think there's 4 sources that we should talk about. And on your survey, 3 of those, we want your opinion about them. The first source is grants. We already feel a sense of optimism around getting a small percentage of this total that we need from the Center for Congregations in Indianapolis, as well as the UCC's Indiana-Kentucky Conference. There are some grants that we think are a very good fit for this. Not to mention that we could try to figure out if we could apply for some grants through the federal government. Then the other 3 sources of funds, and again, before I hit these, this is where you have to tell us what you think. And again, so it's a course correction. Out of the 6, which ones do you like more? But how are you feeling also about whether we've gotten out over our skis? Is it too much to do all at once, or is it exactly the right thing to do right now, etc.? So, number 1 is the reserve funds that Jenny talked about. Some people say, hey, those people, way back when, in some cases, gave that money, and they said they wanted it spent on the building, so this is the time to spend it on the building. But it's sort of a chunk of cash that sits there in the checking account or in savings or in an investment that makes people feel comfortable also. So we have to make a decision as a congregation. Now's the time to spend that money. Some of that money, I think almost all of that money, came from some of our saints, some of them decades ago, and we've been sitting on that money for all this time. Number 2 is a fundraising campaign. We think that it would not be appropriate to mortgage the entirety of this expenditure. And so we think an immediate fundraising campaign to knock out a decent amount of the expense would be appropriate. How much? Well, it's all about which of the projects you tell us we think, you think we ought to do, right? And that's going to change the dollar amount. Certainly, in your survey that you send us, we'd like to hear from you. Are you willing to help with that? This isn't a pledge drive. We don't want you to write down your pledge amount unless somebody, says, I've got $250,000 on me, and that'll make it a pretty quick fundraising campaign. And then the last one is a mortgage. This church has had no mortgage, generally speaking, for a long, long time. Every once in a while, we borrow a small amount of money, 50 grand, because we have to pay for the latest roof fix or whatever it is. But right now, we have no mortgage. We have no borrower. And we think that could be okay. But you have to think about it like any human being would, or any business would. What is my monthly payment on that borrowing going to be, right? So one example is, if we got a bunch of money from these other sources, but we also needed to have a mortgage for 100 grand, that we said, let's pay this off in 10 years, that would add to our annual operating budget $15,000 in expense. So we'd have to be comfortable that was a smart thing to do, that we're going to be able to make room for that in our budget, or that we're going to have additional donations that go to pay down that mortgage over time. So again, we need to hear from you. What of these ideas are good ideas? Which ones do you think we can afford as a group? And which ones are you willing to help us pay for? And now I'll introduce Kelly, our Vice President, with some closing words, I think.
Thanks, John. First, I'm going to tell you about how you can give your feedback back on everything that was presented today. But you just heard from several members of the remodeling team, and I hope you'll join me in showing your appreciation to them, whether you agree with what they're doing or not. So the last 2 pages of your handout, you'll see a paper copy of a survey that you will be getting by email. We hope that if you can, you will take this survey by email or by clicking on the link when you get it in your email, because it just really allows it to be a lot easier for us to collate all of your responses if you fill it out that way. We really want to get kind of like the Wabash guy did. We really want to kind of figure it all out, because he civilly can figure out where the majority of opinions are, and if we can have a system do that for us online, then that is very much preferred. However, if you're someone that struggles with that, you can fill it out by paper and hand it to one of us. If you're ready to do that today, that'd be great, but we are asking you to complete and return these in the next week, so by Sunday, November 12th. So you can take it home and look at it and think about your responses, but hopefully you'll allow some time this week to kind of prioritize. There's also a question on there about, the very last question you'll see is about finances and what you're willing to commit to, and what you think about the proposed different points that John just talked about with the reserve funds and fundraising campaign and borrowing. And then hopefully, and this is all subject to change, but hopefully by December, the first week in December is December 3rd, we'll come back together and have another congregational meeting, and we'll have narrowed down your lists and the surveys, and hopefully we'll get some more cost estimates and some more specific finance planning, and hopefully kick off a fundraising campaign. And then by January, our hope is to come back and look at the updated fundraising, and as a congregation, figure out a vote and what we need to move forward with by January. So, yes.
Can you explain the dollar signs, please?
Yes, so yeah, so we don't have, as we mentioned before, we don't have specific estimates for any of the things. So if you look on your survey, you'll see like a $1 sign, a $2 sign, a $3 sign, I think there's even a $4 sign. So instead of percentages on what things might cost, you'll just know that if it has $4 signs, that's really expensive. If it has a $1 sign, it might not be as expensive. So that's just a way to judge what would be the most expensive projects and what would be the least expensive projects. So,
and again, if we did all the things that are proposed in numbers 1 through 6 on the survey, the estimate is that would be less than $450,000. So if you want to do it all, that's our target number, and then you figure out the dollar signs, much like you would a restaurant rating for the individual projects.
And you'll also, on the online form of the survey, you'll get lots of attachments to it as well, so be sure to open those attachments. Those will include the 6 drawings that Craig had outlined that you can manipulate and look at bigger. It will include Greg's design as well as a video that will accompany Greg's design that walks you through what this new entry may look like. That will be on our YouTube page, so you can click that. It is a fast speed because I had no way to make it slow, so you may just have to watch it a few times. Apparently YouTube can slow it down, Liz says. If you can figure it out or have your grandchild help you figure it out, that's fine too.
Are there any questions, not specifically for me, but I'm probably going to call John back up here to answer some questions.
Start in the front.
Yeah, I have a comment or concern, and I appreciate everything that's being done, and I really appreciate all the effort everybody's put in. It's just amazing, the governance, and it's amazing. But from my back experience in the working world, I was kind of concerned about the chairs in the sanctuary. And my concern is maintaining some sort of order. Because if somebody come in with OCD, their head's going to explode, and that'll be a mess and a lot of paperwork. So I didn't know, are they going to be something that like before every service, we're going to have to go in and straighten them up in some sort of orderly fashion, whether it's to accommodate special situations or that was my only concern. This is something that's going to be an ongoing, and not maintenance as far as repairs, but just consistently, week after week, if they don't get put in order, it's going to be kind of hodgepodge and kind of mess. I didn't know whether these chairs that are proposed will kind of eliminate that, or if these like kind of thought about overcome. So that was my concern.
Yeah, it's a good concern. I would say that, so the chairs are a little bit more substantive than a chair when you go into like 502 East that we were in for a couple of weeks. They're designed to be pew chairs, and they're locked together, literally. So if you imagine 8 of them in a row, it's almost like an 8-person pew. So it's a heavy thing. It's a heavy thing that is sitting there. But it's not attached to the floor, which is part of the intent. So it can be moved around. So I would say yes, there's probably a small amount of volunteer maintenance to make sure it looks fairly orderly before a service. Or to move it in an intentional way, because our pastors want, Pastor Kelly, our pastors they want to have it be different, right? They want to create space for music, or they know we need more open space for a wheelchair that's coming, that kind of thing. So there is the adjustment.
Part of what Dakota and I are doing are checking with colleagues on all of these random projects. We have some field trips lined up, and we already have some colleagues who have reached out and said, we'll show you our best practices about how we do this and how we don't cause more strain on a congregation for any number of these projects. I will say, just so we're clear, we did a lot of straightening of the pews as well. Okay, there was always a weekly cleanup and make sure everything's okay, even though they didn't.
And I'll just say, I came from a church previously that used these kind of chairs, and you can't move a row of them very easily. So it's a lot of physical effort to unhook all of them and move them into a different configuration. So the intent is generally they're going to be just like the pews, they're going to be in the same space all the time, but you got flexibility to move here and there as needed.
And we're not going to change it every week, likely. It's not Lori and I's hoping. I don't know about hers, but
Are there other questions?
Sarah Scholl, go for it.
And I have a prototype in my basement. Maybe we didn't talk about when to bring that, but we'll arrange to have it brought so you all can see what one of them looks like.
Sorry if I missed this in an earlier conversation, but I love the new vestibule idea and the 2 entries that are joined. I love it. Is there still talk of possible portico so that you can unload with a little bit of cover? Is there still time to consider? Just asking.
We have not returned to that conversation. Our architects will tell us we can return to anything. The last time we looked into it, the dollar price tag was high, and we did not return to it, but we can put it on our list of things to revisit.
Yeah, and be sure to include that in your survey too, Sarah.
Yeah, it's training. Please. Please.
This is back to John. Last month's meeting he indicated that we thought we would get into the building by this time, and yet we're not there yet. Do we have an idea yet?
I hope I never said by literally, or do you mean this time next year? Or do you mean this time? Anyway.
Yeah, hold the microphone.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Reverend Bradbury. So here's what I would say the truth is today. Insurance and the church, with the help of the restoration company, are very close to agreeing on what they call a scope of work for the repair of the building, which basically means we have to convince the insurance company of every single thing that needs to be replaced or rebuilt or cleaned or scrubbed or painted or whatever, right? So you get all of that done. 100-page spreadsheet. Once you've got that, then you can kind of be in a go mode. And I really think that we're only a couple of weeks away. Where's Dakota? Agree with that? I mean, there are details, right? But so then we would say, we would contract with the company to do everything up, I'll call it the cleaning out before you start building. And they think they need 8 to 10 weeks to do that. So I bet by the end of January, you kind of have now a shell of a building that you can rebuild in. So then the question becomes, can we know what we want to do in terms of moving some of these walls around on that same time frame? If we make it extraordinarily complex, we'll need more time. I think the restoration company would say, if we were not doing any remodeling improvements, they think they could probably get us back in another 4 to 6 months. Well, I bet we need 6 to 8 months because we're going to need to do these improvements. We're going to need some more time to figure that all out. So where would that get us? So that would get us to the end of September of next year. So to maybe being able to move back in.
And John, can you just speak to why it's taken so long to get to get to this point a little bit?
Now I feel like my mother's on the stage. You're not done yet. So, the emergency work was done, bless their hearts, by Crossroads Restoration. They just immediately came in and just did things without us even hardly approving them because they knew what to do, right? They brought in these huge humidifiers and they got rid of the water and so on and so forth. But then everything after that, you really are in a position where you want the insurance company to be sure that they're going to pay for it before we proceed. Otherwise, we have a decision to make. And that's where we still are, unfortunately, because we have been talking and talking and talking, and they visited us. And Dakota and I spent almost a whole day with them going over each room and counting the lights and so on and so forth to get all of this knocked out in detail so that they can approve it, so that they can say, this is the amount of money you have to rebuild this place to get it back to pre-fire condition. The restoration company's estimate was 900 something. The insurance company started at 600 something. We're going to end up in the middle. We're going to end up on the higher end of that scale. But what really matters is that everything that needs to be replaced is on the list and will be replaced or repaired or sealed or painted or whatever. Is that kind of information you wanted? Okay. And Craig is going to have some.
Yeah. So what I was going to add was we were already talking about doing some of these projects with the Wabash discussion. And so if we had done that in the building, while we were in the building, think of the accessible entrance, we would have been without an accessible entrance for about a month at least. And now we have the opportunity to do that while we're already out of the building. Okay, so it may add a month to the overall time that we can get back into the building, but it is going to be much easier than otherwise it would have been.
And I will name theologically as Dakota's movement. I think you're moving. Are you moving to another person? Head up that way. Great, go that way. Theologically, we are looking at, we're going to be out one Christmas and one Easter. Our goal is to not be out a second Christmas. Okay? It'd be great if we were in for next All Saints Sunday, which is conceivably still a possibility right now. That's kind of how we're encompassing all of these things, the insurance piece, the architectural piece, and the theological piece of us being a congregation. Mike, did that help?
I need the hands again so I can see where I'm going. 1 over here, 3 over here. The other thing I'll add is it's not just about the building. All the stuff has to get replaced. A team of people has to sit down and start ordering and buying and assembling furniture and things like that. So even though the space may be walkable, inhabitable, whatever you want to call it, in and completed and painted, we still need some time to go in and put stuff together and assemble furniture and do that kind of thing. So I'm going to come to these 3 here.
Multiple questions, so I'm sure you knew that when I got the microphone. First question I have is about some of the considerations that are going in particular with the new vestibules and connecting the two. It looks really nice, but I'm curious about the considerations as far as opening spaces up is exactly what we don't want when it comes to security of the building and if there's ever a need to shelter in place. The building is already horrible for sheltering in place. There is no place to do that. And so I hear a lot about aesthetics, but not the practical nature of the building and what we might need in that regard. And then the second big question that I had is talking about flexibility and kind of ignoring our current ministries because we don't know what we're going to have in the future. And I don't know how to make decisions about any of this without knowing what's happening with the preschool. The preschool, if we do continue to have that, is going to limit our ability to take out rooms and repurpose rooms. I thought I heard something about a suite of rooms over by the parlor. So what do we do for storage and things like that? And then if we don't continue with the preschool, that's going to have a huge impact on our budget and ability to possibly do a mortgage. We already have a hard time with the budget. We had a $15,000 deficit that we approved. We would be losing $50,000. So has our giving increased enough to cover that? I know we've also been doing a lot of fundraisers, which historically we've been opposed to. So are we just, I guess, what's our new normal if we decide not to do the preschool thing? It seems like the preschool is going to drive most of the other decisions that need to be made.
So I can start a conversation. Our safety team, of which Seth is a part of, is looking at all of these safety considerations. It's really difficult to consider safety when you don't know what your building's going to look like. In the entryway combination thing, there were some conversations about doors. Not all of the details are on this drawing that you have, but there is a conversation happening about where do we put in doors, like we talked about at Fellowship Hall, to be able to close in that space. Where there were fire doors to the classroom hallway, that is also an option. So those conversations are happening, but we're in a little chicken and egg adventure here with how do we talk about security when we don't know what we're going to have or what still exists. The same conversation is happening with our security system and our cameras, and the reality is because we haven't cleaned out the building, they haven't evaluated the electrical, we don't know what still exists. Okay, so we will get there, it's still on the list, but we don't know exactly. The question about ministries is another one of those scenarios. What we have been saying as a team is the culture in Carmel, preschools register in January for the next school year starting in August. We cannot register for a preschool if we do not know that we have a building to offer. So we know that we're going to be out for right now, and that's why we're taking our time to evaluate what will this look like. We know that there will be changes in the spaces to storage, but honestly, those of us on staff are like, thank goodness, because a lot of the stuff that we had, we didn't need anymore, and we need to be able to purge some of it. So yes, there are spaces that are being changed. When you look at that drawing that Greg did about the entryways, the one room that was very much deleted was what was our preschool director's office. I will tell you that that was the most hated room in the building. She would tell you that. It had no windows. It was painful to work in that room. So while we understand that it means relocating that particular office, it does not mean that that office could never exist again. We do have some flexibility in spaces. So you're right. One of the conversations that we're thinking about pitching to Wabash is how do we use our space and how do we better serve the community, both those inside our congregation and those that are outside of it, whether that's the Tamil school, the preschool, our 12-step groups, etc. That's something that they've done before. I'm looking and waving at James. And it could be our conversation in the spring if we go that route. We just don't know when or if that's exactly how we want to go. That's a beginning. Anybody else have stuff they want to throw in? Did somebody capture notes?
Yeah, I'm going to go to Brad and then I'll come to Jim.
Would it be possible to generically tell us what insurance is covering? Like I know the roof is going to be covered. Also improvements to our HVAC system where, if a fire happened again, it wouldn't get spread all over. Things like that, if that could be put somewhere.
Thank you. So insurance has given us $630,000 or so already. Most of that is in advance on what they estimate is going to be a reasonable final payment that they want to send to us. So from a cash flow point of view, we don't have any problems. The way it works, to use your roof as an example, they're going to pay for the addition of insulation on the roof, which our roof has never had. So the total cost of the roof might be 85 grand by the time we're done, and 30 of that is going to be paid by insurance because we have a special rider in our policy that pays for code requirements, and it's absolutely required by code. So they will be paying for stuff like that. And I think anything else that you would say is a definite code requirement, they will pay for. So to use your HVAC example, I don't know whether that's a requirement. If it is, they would pay for it. If it's not, we would have to make the decision. We would have to say, well, look, we see this as an improvement. It's not a cosmetic improvement. It's really a safety improvement that your example focuses on, and we would have to decide whether we want to spend that money ourselves. Were there any other parts of your question that I forgot?
Just having it accessible.
Yeah, that's probably going to be something we're not going to be able to get into this survey for today or anything. It can be information we'll be sure to try to, collate and share with you. The other thing I'll say back to Seth's point was that both the safety and ministries aspect is the safety team is working on those recommendations, things like we had no way to detect this fire. A staff person stumbled upon it. That's an opportunity to take advantage of something that would probably be the church's financial responsibility. And if it's not a code that we have a fire detection system, they're not going to pay for it, but if we agree it's a safety thing we want, that would be something we would likely. That level of detail is not in this, right? That's separate recommendations safety team's going to come up with and bring to us. The other part I would say about the ministries is that it's sort of a chicken and egg thing in the sense that one can't exist without the other. We have to get the building in some sort of status before we can bring in a ministry. We can't have a ministry without a place for it to go. And so we'll have to have those conversations, but the church would not exist without a preschool, but the church can exist. So it's like we have to figure those things out together as a congregation. So like the budgeting piece is, it is a concern because it netted us some money, but this was the largest amount of net money it had ever netted us. This last year was $50,000. That's a huge number. It historically has never been that high. It's been like around the 20s was like the highest it was before that. So we had added classrooms and classes, et cetera, to get it that high. So I would just add that detail to it. I'm going to come to Joe.
My question actually is about the financing, and it's relative to how I think about whether we engage in a mortgage and how much of our reserves we might actually choose to spend at this time versus how much we keep. And it's related to major maintenance or other major projects that may come about. I'm going to benchmark out 15 years. So things like the sale, which I'm aware from my time in leadership, which now is at about 10 years ago, had come back as we need repair work on the sale. We've not done any of that repair work. So where are we with that? The second one is anything else that might have to happen with the roof. The last time we took out a loan was for replacement of the roof. And the third thing would be the parking lot and the potential to need to redo that in a significant way, because that's a lot of asphalt and it can cost into those $3 sign type of figures, or any other major project that I'm not aware of.
Let me start, and I'm going to look at a couple of experts maybe. So I'll start with the sale. We have a brick sale, and it's falling.
How many people don't know what he's talking about?
It's a big thing that sticks up that looks like the Acura dealership, or whatever, not Acura, the BMW. It looks like the BMW sign that sticks out on the top of our, and Lori will give you more theological language. It's the boat runner. It's the brick, the thing that sticks straight up. It's our steeple. It's basically our steeple. Okay. When I came on, Craig and I had a conversation about that, and we know that it's falling. I'm going to say, did you know Mount Rushmore is on the move? It's moved about this much in 300 years. I don't want to say that that's the same thing with the sale, but just because we haven't talked about it in 10 years doesn't mean it's going to fall down tomorrow. If we were in a safety concern, Craig would be letting me know, or others would be letting us know it's going to fall in on us. That is not the case, as I understand it. So you want to give more on that, Craig? Okay.
So I was first brought in I think 10 or 11 years ago, we had a structural engineer, forensic firm look at it. They showed us what was wrong. It wasn't constructed per the drawings. And so there is what we call spalling of the brick. And so water is getting in there. It can't get out because there isn't enough space for air to come in and dry it out. And so it ends up rotting the brick ties that are holding the brick up. So 10 years ago, we said, oh crap, that sounds really bad. We monitored it for a year.
Exactly how that conversation went, like literally, word for word. Jill was there, I was there, that was it.
So we decided we would monitor it for a year. We actually, people would get up on the roof and look at the back side, how much it was falling. If it was, we would see it come down on the shingles. We would see it come down on the other roofs. We could go in the memory garden side and look that way. In 10 years, we have seen very little. It has not changed much at all. So I would never say it's not a concern or that it will not fall down. I do not believe it's an immediate concern right now.
And the major maintenance piece was the other component. You'll see in the financial sheet on there, Jenny has nicely outlined that previously leadership had chose to put 5% of whatever we came up with giving. So if we had come up with $300,000 is how much we think we're going to receive in pledges and gifts, we've allotted 5% of that each month to go into this major maintenance, sort of paying ourselves to store up some money to spend on things like a new preschool shed or this or that. We have reduced that in times to 2% is currently what we've been doing in the last couple of years. And so there is money still in that, but we would move over to the building fund, as we also named, to sort of take some monies out of that as well. So that is not at the size maybe that it was when it was gifted. It has dwindled a little bit. And then the last part was to the parking lot piece. Prior to the fire, I was thinking about getting our parking lot resurfaced and restriped. It was almost probably time to do that. And Craig and I looked at different bids, and it was right around a $14,000 standpoint to, sort of recoat it and repaint it. I don't know what the changes that Greg's proposal would name, but I don't think it'd be significant enough to go over that amount to do the entirety of the parking lot. Questions? Did you have something to say?
I was just going to say, Jenny had to leave. She's our treasurer, and I think my teenagers are kind of becoming one into the web world, and so if we could just take a couple more questions.
Who else had a question? Oh, Don.
Thank you. My curiosity was this. There was some talk about the restoration and cleanup folks and their work, and the next piece would be the remodel construction work. And I don't know if the decision's been advanced, but there was some talk about using the cleanup folks in a same context to do the construction work. Has that gone forward, or has there been some thought about hiring a construction management firm and a firm who specializes in remodel and construction to do the next step of the work after cleanup's finished? Thanks.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, so we have not made a decision that we would bring as a recommendation to this group. So you're exactly right just to reframe it. The same company, Crossroads Restoration, that did the emergency cleanup, we do want to use them for the roof. So they would be the general contractor, and they hire a roofing subcontractor, and then there's miscellaneous pieces that also have to be done. And for what I'm calling stage 3, which is come get all the contents and clean a lot of them or dispose of some of them, demo the building, take out the carpet, take out the ceiling tile, take down a few walls that have to be removed because they got wet, etc. And then thorough deep cleaning of the brick, other kinds of deep cleaning, and then spray sealing of the wood surfaces that are porous. So you put this special lacquer on it to hold in the smell. So now you've got a shell of a building that is clean and does not smell, and you're ready to rebuild in it. So they would do that piece of work at minimum. And then we're thinking about everything from that point forward as a job that they could do, they want to do it, but also any general contractor could do. And so by looking at their references, and especially with the help of Craig and Greg, that's something that we need to talk about more, is how do we make that decision about who should do that last piece of work.
Thank you.
You bet.
And I will name that the one grant that we've already applied for from the Center for Congregations is a $15,000 matching grant, so it would be a $30,000 project. And that is for design consultation in the realm of architectural work consulting. How's that for a mouthful? But basically, we have amazing architects here who work for firms, but we also need to protect relationships and make sure that we can do that with integrity. They also are not expert acousticians and other special titled people, but they know to advise us well. So we will hear about that grant the third week of November. The other grants that we are applying for are brick and mortar type grants, but that takes a little bit longer to be able to apply for and hopefully get dollars that will actually go towards building it and not necessarily consulting. But it's all kind of in that same realm of figuring out what projects do we want to do so we know who to hire and how many other grants we need to get along with how much fundraising we need to do.
So please look for in your email this survey and leave us any and all of your thoughts by next Sunday. And thank you all for sticking with us this whole time.